Well, it's a difficult question in one way. Your question is, isn't the seeking or seeking for happiness inherently egoic? Isn't it inherently egotistical? I would say no. But if you disagree with me, I may not disagree with you. But seeking happiness is inherent. I'm not saying it's inherent for the self or the ego. I'm just going to say it's inherent because what is happening is that we are seeking ourselves. We know that our true nature is unbounded joy and happiness. Perfect happiness, peace, and love. And so we seek that. We seek our own birthright, what we are. Because we intuitively know that's what we are, and that's our potential. More than our potential, it's our actuality. But from the limited view of ignorance, it feels like that's our potential. So we are seeking to come home to what we are. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that is to be encouraged, because that's your homing instinct, to be happy, to want to be happy. The problem is that if you think you're the body-mind, then you seek happiness in objects. You say, I'm the body-mind, and therefore if I do X, Y, and Z practice, I can get enlightenment. That's the wrong approach to practice. This practice says, to whom do these thoughts, feelings, desires occur? They occur to me. Who am I? And the answer is pure consciousness, the being, the presence that you already are. You don't need to attain that. So the practice is to just be what you are and not think you are the body mind living in the world. Does that make sense, Marcelo?
Yes.
Rather than taking yourself to be the body mind and then doing the practice. So if you're reaching for an object, then you are perpetuating the ego, and it will block your practice. When you turn away from body-mind world, when you defocus from the body-mind world, when you let go, when you surrender, then you are no longer perpetuating the ego. So it's a loving process. You let go and you fall back into yourself, or you can say you fall back into love. But we're not consumed or concerned with objects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Could it be that maybe the initial impulse to go and sit and practice is a kind of reaching for an object, and then during the process, this initial motivation could fade away slowly?
That's correct. Yes. Because it's the mind, the teachings are given initially to the mind, and then the mind decides that it wants to sit down and practice, having been convinced by various things such as the teaching. or the teacher, you see. Because the mind is a fiction, once it sits down and attends to itself or the self, it disappears. But when it attends to objects or Maya, or what we call second or third persons, then it perpetuates itself. So only when we attend to the first person, or does the mind cease to be the mind, it's just the self. There's no object in focus now. Without an object in focus, you're just pure consciousness. Let me illustrate this again, just to make it, I hope this will make it clearer, because it's a confusing thing. Traditionally, one way of talking about the self is by saying Sat, Chit, Ananda, right? And these are three aspects of the pure self, pure consciousness. Okay. There are actually two other words that are often used, which is Nama Rupa. Have you heard me say that before? Yes.
Yes.
Nama Rupa means name. Nama means name. Rupa means form or shape. It's name and what we would say in English, name and form. Nama, Rupa, Sat, Chit, Ananda. Okay. When you're attending objects, you're attending to Nama Rupa. Nama Rupa is Maya. That's the unreal aspect of the five terms. Nama Rupa, Sat, Chit, Ananda. Nama Rupa is Maya, objects. When you stop attending to objects, all that's left is Sat, Chit, Ananda, which is the consciousness. All of Maya has these five aspects. It's got a name and a form. So if I show you this cup, let's say this is cup, this is in Maya. It's got a name and a form. It's got a particular shape, and we call it a cup. It's got a name and a form, but it's also consciousness. When you remove the name and form, all you're left with is the consciousness. But when you think it's real, then you've added Nama Rupa to this. So you've got Maya. So we could say consciousness, we could have a mathematical equation. We say consciousness plus name and form equals Maya. Yeah. And we can say Maya, take away name and form. It's the same equation now. I'm just jigging it around the other way if you remember your high school maths.
Yes.
Maya, take away name and form equals consciousness. You see? Make sense? So when we turn towards awareness or the subject, what we're doing, we're removing name and form from the mind. So it's the mind that turns within, and then it becomes consciousness, because it's the only thing that removes name and form from it. And then it's just, because the mind is actually the self. Everything, there's only the self. When you turn to the first person, everything just becomes the self. There's only the pure consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yes.
I'm just hoping I don't confuse people more by these kinds of explanations.
No, I don't think so. It's pretty clear. Yes.
And through doing the practice, you see, you will realize that you're doing it egoically, and then you'll realize you're not doing it egoically. You'll gain that experience. Again, like tennis, if you practice, you'll start to know when you've done a good forehand, when you've done a good backhand. It'll feel right. Yeah, you'll start to develop a technique. You'll know how to do your top spin. You know how to do your slice. All these different things. You get a feel for it. That can't really be fully explained by a book or verbal teaching, but the verbal teaching can help, of course, massively. But then you do it, and you start to realize all these questions start to fade away once you practice, and you find out how it works with your own temperament as well. You see how much effort to make how much surrender to make, what is important for Massimo. You know, in that balance, you'll find that balance for you. And all teachings, all liberation teachings, initially are speaking to the mind, and it's the mind that takes them in and processes them, and then eventually turns back within itself to the self, and then dissolves and becomes just self. So yes, it starts off as you and ego sitting down to practice, and then somewhere during the practice, the ego goes. That's right. So you could say the ego walks into a room, and then the self walks out of the room, you know, metaphorically speaking again.
Okay, thank you.
The ego sits into the meditation cushion, and then maybe the self gets up if it's a successful meditation. As it were.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Matsu. Lovely question. Great question.